The scene opens at a chicken place called Cacao Chicken, where Li Jian is seen sitting with Texu. Texu, the saint of Sagittarius, calls out to Li Jian to warn him that he was going to die tomorrow. Li Jian the 13th awakened, being unbothered, asks why he wants him to die that badly. He questions if it's because he was eating 2 drumsticks. Texu annoyingly replies that his name was Hugo Otters, not Texu. Li Jian says that he understands why Hugo was worried, but he was not going to die. He states the number of calamities that he had killed was way more than all of the 12 saints combined. He questions if Hugo thinks that he will die. Hugo becomes silent and remembers the Demon Tower, the place where the worst calamity that annihilated humanity lived, that all started on the last day of the 20th century. The calamities appeared out of nowhere and drove humans into a corner with overwhelming power. Just when humans were engulfed in chaos and horror, 12 gods, who called themselves the divine gods, appeared, and they promised humans that they would give them the power to overcome the calamities and that they would select 12 awakened to receive that power. But something unexpected had happened. A 13th awakened had appeared, and that person had not received any blessings from any god. But he was overwhelmingly strong and amazing when compared to the rest of the 12 saints, and that was none other than Li Jian. In the Demon Tower, Hugo thanks Li Jian and says that they were able to conquer the Demon Tower this time because of Li Jian. Li Jian replies, calling him Texu, saying that he doesn't need his lip service. He could just buy Li Jian fried chicken for 5 years. Hugo, boringly, asks if Li Jian wasn't sick of fried chicken and also says he had told Li Jian several times not to call him Texu, as his name was Hugo Otters, to which Li Jian says that he couldn't get used to calling him that. They were interrupted by the other saints gossiping that if they eliminate the Crimson Eye that time round, they would probably receive incredible rewards, and no matter who says what, since that was the worst calamity, they would make sure to get 1,000,000,000. Li Jian interrupts them, saying that they should settle for being able to stay in a 7-star hotel in Hawaii for 10 years, since several countries were on the verge of bankruptcy due to Crimson Eye. One of the saints states that Li Jian needs to get a lot of money in order to make deals with them, only then could Li Jian fix up his face that used to be handsome and his injured body. Li Jian realizes that, when put nicely, they were called saints, but they were actually just thugs who cared about themselves. The saint asks Li Jian not to go running to a site where an incident had occurred immediately just because they called for him. They need the incident to create a certain number of victims so that they would get more reward money. Li Jian dismisses them, saying to just get going. Li Jian realizes they were just disgusting scoundrels, and he decides that once they had defeated the Crimson Eye, Li Jian was going to cut off any connections he had with them. The scene shifts to the battlefield at the Demon Tower, where they were standing in front of the Crimson Eye. The other saints were just shivering in fear from seeing the sight of the Crimson Eye, making Li Jian realize the tremendous pressure of the Crimson Eye just by looking at it. As Crimson Eye screams out, the ground crumbles with fire destroying all the surroundings. Seeing this, all the saints begin to question how they were supposed to fight something like that, and hence they run away to save their lives. Li Jian, being pissed, asks how those guys dare to call themselves saints. Li Jian decides that, in any case, the person who would defeat the Crimson Eye would be he himself. He takes up his sword to dash towards the Crimson Eye, but at the end, he got hit by a sword and fell into a trap. Li Jian couldn't comprehend how much time had passed, what it was like on the outside, or if the flow of time within the tower and outside the tower was different. But at the time, he just had to keep slashing because that place was a special trap that summoned infinite calamities. Li Jian, in the middle of the fight, declares that this won't be enough to kill him. Clenching his fist and his soul filled with the anger for revenge, he declares he would definitely survive all that and tear off the damned heads of those scoundrels. 20 years had passed as Li Jian reaches the administrator who can't believe what is happening. He cries out in fear as it screams if there was anyone else left. The administrator begs him to leave, but Li Jian asks him to scream all he wants as he kills him. As the tower crumbles down, Li Jian asks if he can finally be free to go out. The scene shifts at the entrance of the Demon Tower, where some boys were running to save their lives from the calamities. Jimin asks his friend why he hadn't listened to his warning not to go over there, to which his friend, frightened, says how could he have known that they would meet high-ranked calamities there. Jimin says that they were goners, as the fortune teller had told him that he would meet an unimaginable monster. As they get surrounded by the calamities, Jimin realizes that if Li Jian survived the Demon Tower, a calamity like that wouldn't have been a problem. Suddenly, the gates of the Demon Tower start to open, and a huge explosion occurs, and the whole tower collapses. As the boys start to realize what had happened, the friend calls out to Jimin, saying that there was a human coming out of the collapsed tower. Li Jian walks out of the collapsed tower, extremely angry, saying how dare those scoundrels stab him and push him into the trap. He clenches his fist to declare that they all are going to die. The scene continues as the boys see Li Jian emerging from the debris of the tower and beating the crap out of the calamities. Jimin's friend says he couldn't believe it, Even though those were orange-class calamities that even high-ranked Awakened struggle with, Li Jian was swatting them like bugs. Suddenly, Li Jian jumps in front of the boys, shocking them as they ask why Li Jian was attacking them. Li Jian, surprised to see humans, says that the area is cleaned up now. Jimin whispers to his friend that Li Jian came from the tower, suggesting it was an incredible scoop. Shocked, his friend asks Jimin what kind of place he thinks the tower is for him to believe someone could come out alive. He insists that Li Jian must have just been nearby when the tower collapsed. Suddenly, they notice the boss of the wolves standing behind Li Jian. Panicked, they tell each other to run, but before they can move, the wolf launches an attack. A huge blast occurs, destroying everything in the surroundings. After the dust settles, Jimin and his friend try to comprehend if they're alive, only to be surprised to see Li Jian standing in front of them, protecting them. Angry, Li Jian curses the wolf and defeats it with a single hard punch. Turning to Jimin, Li Jian asks if things are over this time. Analyzing the situation, Li Jian asks the boys to make them shiver. He asks them to buy him some food and clothes. The scene shifts to a fast food restaurant, where Jimin is shocked, and his friend faints down to see that Li Jian ate $10,000 worth of food. Li Jian explains that, since the boys told him they didn't have much money, he held back a bit. Hearing this, Jimin's friend becomes furious and asks what Li Jian means by held back. Li Jian, unfazed, reminds them that they offered to buy him everything as thanks for saving their lives and proceeds to order more food, making Jimin's friend scream. Curious, Jimin asks Li Jian who he really is, a disciple or a divine cadre captain, and what he was doing near the tower. Li Jian casually replies that he just came out of the tower and ended up there. Li Jian brushes it off, asking that he doesn't seem like a normal person, and he can sense magic from him. Jimin's friend interrupts, stating that it's obvious Jimin is a disciple and asking Li Jian if he isn't one too, awakened with the blessings of a god. Li Jian, annoyed, says gods aren't worth a damn and questions why he would serve those beaches. Looking at his reflection in a spoon, Li Jian suddenly gets shocked and screams for a mirror. Upon looking at himself in the mirror, Li Jian is surprised to see that his entire body has fully recovered. He notes that such wounds should have been impossible to heal without risking his strength. Even his left arm, which was previously damaged, is now fine. Inspecting his left arm closely, Li Jian notices a strange snake mark on his palm. Suddenly, the snake mark begins glowing. His left arm glows with the green light, making Li Jian clench his teeth in pain. After that, Li Jian is pulled into another dimension where a giant snake appears before him. The system reveals that Li Jian had defied death, achieved the impossible, and earned incredible power. His existing abilities are being transferred to his new body, while all his achievements in the tower are being converted into experience. The system notifies Li Jian that he has generated zodiac skills and that his unique traits and skills have been evolved, granting him the power of Ophiuchus. Li Jian looks at the giant green snake with glowing red eyes and instinctively reaches out to touch it. As he does, a bright light envelopes him, and he is abruptly brought back to the real world. Jimin approaches, asking if Li Jian is okay. Confused, Li Jian asks if they saw the snake, to which Jimin replies that he saw no such thing. Instead, he describes how Li Jian stripped off his clothes, ran to the mirror, grabbed his own wrist, and screamed. Realizing others can't see the snake, Li Jian grows more puzzled. Suddenly, green screens appear in front of Li Jian, displaying his new status as the Master of Ophiuchus. Li Jian notes that his physical transformation is due to the super regeneration skill. He wonders why the saints never mentioned experiencing anything similar and realizes he can't sense the presence of any divine gods. Regardless, his body has healed, and now Li Jian resolves to kill the saints who abandoned him and slaughter the traitor who stabbed him. The scene shifts to the remains of the collapsed demon tower, where police officers are surveying the site. Two officers gossip about how the impenetrable demon tower has finally collapsed, speculating that the news will throw the world into chaos. One officer wonders if this could be the work of Li Jian's followers or disciples who hated Li Jian. The other dismisses the idea, pointing out that the calamities in the tower were massive, and even high-ranked disciples would have struggled against them. One officer speculates if Li Jian really survived, for which his companion states that he doesn't know, and they'll have to wait for more information. The scene then shifts to the headquarters of an organization, where reporters bombard Yang Wei with questions about the tower's collapse and whether there's any chance Li Jian survived. Yang Wei dismisses them, saying he will not comment on that question. Moving out, in his car afterward, Yang Wei fumes at how often Li Jian's name is brought up. He considers the possibility of Li Jian being alive after spending 20 years in the tower but quickly dismisses it as impossible. He recalls that the tower contained tens of thousands of demonic beasts, all of them black-ranked, and escaping would have been a miracle. Moreover, Li Jian's body had been severely damaged from the recoil of his powers since, unlike the other 12 saints, he wasn't blessed by the gods. Yang Wei mutters that if Li Jian somehow survived, he sighs off thinking that everything would be over. The scene shifts to the airport, where Hugo Otters is being welcomed upon his arrival as one of the 12 saints. As he descends the stairs, he asks a security officer about the Prime Minister's whereabouts. The officer informs him that the Prime Minister is waiting at his residence and that Hugo's vehicle has been prepared. As Hugo departs, the officer comments on how dignified Hugo looks, saying he is the epitome of a true chosen one. While riding in the car, Hugo's phone rang again and again. Irritated to his wits, Hugo curses the reporters, frustrated with their constant conspiracy theories about Li Jian being alive, even though it has already been over 200 years. Annoyed, he throws his vibrating cell phone aside. Lost in thought, Hugo begins to recall the day he told Li Jian about his impending death. He remembers that during the Demon Tower raid, he had stayed outside to deal with the calamities on Jian's request. Hugo had hoped his prophecy was wrong and that Li Jian would return safely. However, the other saints who accompanied Li Jian had abandoned him, returning with only the head of Crimson Eye. Their actions were celebrated as achievements, and they were hailed as heroes alongside Hugo, solidifying their power and authority. Hugo couldn't believe Li Jian was truly dead and had requested multiple searches for him, only for all of them to be denied. He recalls a particular moment when he asked Zhang-Louis Moleng, the cancer saint, for help in searching for Li Jian. Zhang-Louis dismissed the idea, reminding Hugo of the immense calamities that had emerged from the tower and calling the notion of Li Jian's survival absurd. He even suggested that if Hugo cared so much, he should search for Li Jian himself, though that would leave the saints reduced to only 11. Hugo is jolted from his memories by his driver, who informs him of a call from the Prime Minister. Upon answering, Hugo impatiently asks what the matter is. The Prime Minister inquires if Hugo has heard about the tower's collapse. Frustrated, Hugo retorts that if this is another ploy to discuss Li Jian, he's not interested. He firmly states that Li Jian died that day in the tower and insists that the Demon Tower incident was caused by Li Jian's followers. If the Prime Minister is looking to exploit the issue for votes, Hugo refuses to participate. The PM abruptly disagrees, clarifying that he's not talking about that. Instead, he reveals that, according to news from the Korean government, Li Jian's exclusive call line had just rung. Hugo is shocked and demands confirmation, asking if the line truly rang. Realizing the weight of the news, he hurriedly orders his driver to stop the car. Remembering the missed calls on his own phone, Hugo frantically retrieves it and plays a voicemail. As the voicemail plays, Hugo hears Li Jian's voice addressing him as Teksu and promising to find him and kill him. Recognizing Li Jian's voice, Hugo is overcome with shock and panic. He immediately instructs his driver to return to the airport. Meanwhile, the scene shifts back to the restaurant, where Li Jian is smiling at his phone, amused that Hugo has grown up enough to ignore his calls. Jimin, curious, asks Li Jian who he's been calling repeatedly. Li Jian gives a short reply, saying they'll find out soon enough. Intrigued by the phone, Li Jian remarks that it's called a smartphone, marveling at how much the world has changed since 2005 when he entered the tower. Jimin, equally amazed, mentions that Li Jian can now access the internet and watch the news. Curious about his past, Li Jian asks Jimin to search for articles about Li Jian. Jimin shows the trending news articles about Li Jian, which makes Li Jian quite curious. As he scrolls through the comments, Li Jian becomes furious but quickly suppresses his emotions, dismissing the negativity as trivial. However, his attention is drawn to an article discussing his will. Li Jian recalls that he had agreed to donate all his properties and possessions to orphans. But as he continues reading, Li Jian discovers that his wealth was instead passed on to the 12 saints. Furious, Li Jian crushes the smartphone, vowing to rip the saints apart, making Jimin cry down on his shattered phone. Sitting back down, Li Jian contemplates his situation. Even though he wants to announce his return, he realizes his appearance has drastically changed over the past 20 years. If he openly claimed to be Li Jian, people might think he's insane. Resolving to stay quiet for now, Li Jian decides to handle the saints one by one. Suddenly, a green screen appears in front of Li Jian, alerting him that someone is watching him. Recognizing the presence, Li Jian abruptly leaves the restaurant, claiming he needs fresh air. Stepping outside, he notices a massive household god in the distance. The screen identifies it as belonging to Ares. Enraged, Li Jian mutters about their audacity, calling them nothing more than slaves to the divine gods. As Li Jian processes the situation, he overhears a couple walking by. The man complains about how noisy it's become with everyone talking about Li Jian, questioning why he gets so much attention since he's a lost cause. The woman smiles and agrees, mocking Li Jian's legacy. Jimin notices a brooch on the man's coat, indicating they're part of the Gemini divine cadre. He quickly warns Li Jian not to engage with them. However, the man approaches Li Jian to ask him to move out, blowing cigarette smoke in his face and taunting him to fight if he's angry. Before Li Jian can react, the woman drags the man away, calling Li Jian a coward and remarking that losers like him were the type to idolize Li Jian. She speculates that the idea of Li Jian being a saint must have been a lie. Jimin praises Li Jian for holding his anger, noting that the couple are A-ranked. But Li Jian, unable to control his rage, turns around and calls out to them, addressing them as roaches. The couple stops, turning back to confirm what Li Jian just called them. Without hesitation, Li Jian doubles down, affirming that the two of them are nothing but cockroaches. The scene continues as the man walks up to Li Jian, challenging him to repeat what he just called them. But Li Jian remained unfazed. The person taunted to say that Li Jian was a mere regular person, someone from whom he couldn't even feel a speck of mana. But with a flick of his finger, Li Jian sends the man flying into the air, creating a huge scene. Everyone is shocked upon seeing this, and the girl sneakily tries to land an attack on Li Jian from behind. Noticing her, Li Jian remarks, asking if she really thought he wouldn't notice what she was up to. With another flick of his finger, Li Jian sends her flying back into the air. Jimin's friend, worried, tells Li Jian that he shouldn't use his abilities like that in the middle of the street, to which Li Jian replies that they would have been dead if he had actually used his ability. Hearing this, both boys are shocked at how Li Jian managed to overpower A-ranked disciples with only his finger. Li Jian bends down and rips off the pendant from the man, remarking that something felt weird about hitting him. He notices the pendant and asks if it's a divine artifact. Then, he questions why those scoundrels had it, as only saints were supposed to possess such items. Jimin, surprised, explains that if Li Jian really doesn't know anything, humanity had almost gone extinct due to the calamities several decades ago. It was only thanks to the divine gods and the saints they chose that humanity managed to survive. However, since the entire world couldn't be protected by just 12 saints, the saints gathered followers and made them divine cadres. These were people who awakened by being granted power from the saints and were referred to as disciples. Their ranks were proportional to their power. The saints chosen by the divine gods were at the top, then 10 stars could be considered saint candidates. The strongest disciples who commanded the others were called divine cadre captains, while the rest were simply disciples. The divine gods' power came from the faith of their disciples. As a result, there were constant competitions to recruit more people into their divine cadres. The chosen disciples were then granted gifts from the divine gods. Hearing all this, Li Jian realizes that all of this had taken place during the 20 years he had been away. His thoughts are interrupted by Jimin, who calls out and asks him to look up at the sky. As Li Jian looks up, a screen appears, revealing that the households of wealth and greed under Ares were watching the situation. They seemed to be enjoying the chaos and urged Li Jian to finish off the man and the woman, promising him a useful gift if he killed the two. Jimin's friend, shocked, realizes that Li Jian has caught the attention of the household gods. He explains that these entities were like shadows of the divine gods, so opposing them would be the same as opposing the divine gods themselves. Jimin's friend urgently asks Li Jian to heed the gods' words. Li Jian, however, nonchalantly says that he had been wondering why Yang Wei's goons were in a place like that. He concludes that they were likely trying to fill their stomachs through such means, noting that Yang Wei hadn't changed at all. With that, Li Jian leaps toward the household gods, as he crunches the ground, creating an aura blast that scatters them. He declares that they dared to stand against him, mocking their arrogance. Jimin is stunned upon witnessing the Ares gods fleeing and realizes that Li Jian is definitely not an ordinary person. Li Jian then asks Jimin about the man lying on the floor, specifically if he is also a disciple of Gemini. Jimin confirms this, adding that Gemini's divine cadre has the most influence in the country and is an elite force consisting of several influential figures. Li Jian remarks that they must have a lot of money, concluding that everything the man was wearing would be branded clothing. With that, Li Jian begins looting the unconscious man. The scene shifts to the apartments, where Jimin tells Li Jian that he lives in the apartment on the second level, the one with no lights on. Jimmy tries to thank Li Jian for saving their lives and bringing them home, bowing his head down. But hearing no response, he sneaks a peek, noticing that Li Jian is yawning and asking if he's coming inside since he's sleepy. Jimmy gets furious, asking if Li Jian plans to mooch off him in his own house. In Jimin's homes, Li Jian shaves off his beard and watches his reflection in the mirror, admiring his handsome face in the mirror. Jimin, slightly mesmerized, asks if he cut his hair and compliments him, saying he looks cool. Li Jian asks if that's so, smiling inwardly, thinking that in the past, every strand of hair was precious since he kept losing it as a side effect of his abilities, and now he gets to style it freely. But feeling an uneasy sensation, Li Jian questions why there's a calamity in the house. Sensing a fly buzzing toward him, Li Jian crushes it with his fist. Jimin asks if he killed it barehanded, saying even professionals couldn't do that. Li Jian swats other flies, stating that it's not just one calamity and questioning why they keep coming. Jimin wonders if Li Jian is giving off a scent that attracts calamities, to which Li Jian dismissively says it must be something in the house attracting them, likely because of all the evil artifacts. Jimin explains he received the items directly from the Gemini Saint and that, although they're his, they've been blessed. As he tries to show them to Lee Ji-yeon slices one in two, making Jimin scream and shiver in despair. Lee Ji-yeon informs that the mask is a divine artifact that monitors its buyer as he sorts through the items, throwing out another, saying the magical box is a divine artifact that steals personal information, and the watch, which attracts calamities. He states that those saint scoundrels not only steal money but sell evil artifacts to people, feeding off them. Lee Ji-yeon gets angry, shouting to throw them all out. The bell rings, and a young man enters. Lee Ji-yeon questions who he is, and Jimin calls him Sung-jae. Sung-jae flares up his aura, stating that he is the owner of this house. The scene then shifts to Aries' divine cadre Yang Wei's residence, where Yang Wei is shocked to hear the report that the household gods in Korea have disappeared. His subordinate confirms that the council branch is in a panic over this. Yang Wei wonders who would dare do such a thing, noting that household gods are direct subordinates of the divine gods, and no awakened would dare chase them away. Yang Wei orders his subordinate to contact the other saints to see if they have any clues, but the subordinate reports that the Sagittarius is still as uncontactable as always. Yang Wei dismisses the issue, assuming the Sagittarius is probably in England as a mercenary. The subordinate adds that, shortly after arriving in England, the Sagittarius left for Korea. Yang Wei grows suspicious, thinking that Hugo, Lee Ji-yeon's best friend, may have returned due to rumors of Lee Ji-yeon's revival. Wondering if that psycho is really alive, he angrily throws a lamp at his bodyguard, exclaiming that it's impossible. He orders a thorough investigation and asks about other matters. The subordinate informs him that, at the location where the household gods disappeared, a disciple of Gemini was found unconscious, left in only his underwear, lying undressed on the streets. According to witnesses, the culprit was seen with a handsome face. Yang Wei considers that it might not be Lee Ji-yeon but acknowledges that the situation is worsening. Rumors of Lee Ji-yeon's return are spreading, the household gods have vanished, and they recently failed in their conquest of the Spider Queen. Yang Wei fears his position might be threatened and orders the preparation of his private jet, confirming he's going to Korea to find out what's happening himself. The scene shifts to a Gemini-affiliated hospital in Korea, where an old man demands to know who dared to hurt his grandson like this. A Gemini disciple, Min Sung-hoon, tries to calm him, saying he needn't worry about what happened. That's why the Gemini divine cadre has dispatched him, calling him chairman. Sung-jae questions Jimin that he met him at the Demon Tower, and that person defeated the calamities with his bare hands, all by himself. He further asks if he even beat an A-rank disciple, for which Jimin nods his head firmly, confirming it. Sung-jae fumes in anger, questioning if Jimin thinks he'll believe that, accusing him of breaking all the divine artifacts in the house. Lee Ji-yeon points out that he told them those artifacts were fake. Sung-jae questions his divine career and which divine path he's in, but Lee Ji-yeon asks if he really needs to follow one. Sung-jae then asks which divine god he serves, for which Lee Ji-yeon replies it's himself, not the 12 morons. Sung-jae, furious, questions Lee Ji-yeon's awakened class, to which Lee Ji-yeon answers it's a production class. Sung-jae questions Lee Ji-yeon's name, and Lee Ji-yeon introduces himself as Lee Ji-yeon. Sung-jae flares up in anger, with Jimin trying to calm him down and requesting Lee Ji-yeon not say that name. Still furious, Sung-jae accuses Lee Ji-yeon of trespassing, breaking all their divine artifacts, and mentioning that name. He flares his aura, demanding how Lee Ji-yeon dares to pretend to be Lee Ji-yeon-nim. Jimin warns him to be careful, as they're indoors. Lee Ji-yeon gets notified that the mana of the disciple of Gemini is exploding. Lee Ji-yeon compliments that it's cool and notes that at this rate, Sung-jae will burn the house down. Lee Ji-yeon activates his Gaze of God's skill, learning that Sung-jae is a disciple of Gemini, awakened rank A, with the title, The Punisher, and skills including Witch Burning Gas and Seal of Perpetual Snow, showing his genius level with a learning effect of 200%. Lee Ji-yeon chuckles, noting Sung-jae's high-ranking summoning skills at a young age, and credits his genius trait. Jimin warns Lee Ji-yeon aside that revealing Sung-jae as an A-rank disciple of Gemini is also an Lee Ji-yeon fanatic. Sung-jae furiously asks Jimin if he heard what he said, to warn him to leave if he doesn't want to die. Lee Ji-yeon dashes towards Sung-jae, appearing behind him, teasing him for playing with fire. Sung-jae, startled, tries to turn away, surprised at Lee Ji-yeon's speed. Lee Ji-yeon flicks him, sending him flying to make him faint. Lee Ji-yeon remarks on the danger of burning the whole building down, not just the house. Jimin asks if Sung-jae is dead, for Lee Ji-yeon, chuckling, reassuring him that Sung-jae is fine. Jimin, skeptical, questions if Sung-jae is truly okay as bubbles are fuming from his mouth. Lee Ji-yeon heads to his room, stating he'll sleep until it's time to wake, as he sneaks to see a room filled with his body dolls and other statues. Lee Jian, taken aback, questions what those statues are. Jimin explains Sungjae is a Lee Jian fanatic, which is why he collected all those items. Sungjae warns Lee Jian not to enter, as that room is filled with his Lee Jian collection, valued more than his life. Lee Jian snaps off the statues' heads, saying they make him uncomfortable. Sungjae screams in agony, pleading with him to stop, but Lee Jian states that he's not crazy, he's Lee Jian. Sungjae cries out in desperation, watching his precious items get destroyed. The scene shifts to a coffee shop, where it's reported that yesterday afternoon, 2 Gemini disciples were humiliated by a suspicious individual, who stripped them of all belongings and clothes. Hugo suspects it's Lee Jian and questions what trouble he's up to now. The waiter approaches to take Hugo's order, but Hugo warns him to stop the act and leave, recognizing him as Yang Wei. The girl grins, admitting he figured it out too fast and that's no fun. Yang Wei mentions it's been a while and says he hasn't been able to contact Hugo. Moving closer, Yang Wei hints that since they both thought of Lee Jian, it would be best if Hugo tells him what he knows. Hugo shrugs, stating this is why he hates Yang Wei's perversion of possessing others' bodies as he pleases. With a snap, the girl returns to herself, confused about her actions. Hugo, irritated, realizes Yang Wei is using tricks and knows he must find Lee Jian first, wondering where Lee Jian could be. The scene shifts to Bucheon in the Gyeonggi province. At the large mart, Jimin asks Sungjae if he thinks Lee Jian is truly Lee Jian. Sungjae states he's kidding since Lee Jian looks completely different, noting that Lee Jian, a hero who saved humanity, wouldn't be a thug like him. Jimin insists he saw Lee Jian coming from the Demon Tower and that he's incredibly strong, but Sungjae denies it, citing his father's word. Jimin acknowledges that Sungjae's father is Sagittarius, to which Sungjae suggests they go and pay for all this. They hear a thief shout as someone flees through Jimin and Sungjae. Jimin notes the thief's speed resembles a Scorpio disciple, while Sungjae observes he's using his abilities to steal, risking emptying all wallets in the store. The thief, confident that even a saint couldn't catch him, intends to flee, but Lee Jian effortlessly stops him. Jimin asks what he's doing, and Lee Jian explains he forgot to tell him to buy some chicken. Nearby, Sunghoon comes in to comment on Lee Jian's impressive skill, noting that Scorpio disciples are notoriously fast. He advises Lee Jian to call the police next time. Lee Jian, annoyed, mutters about the son of a beach. Suddenly a tremor shakes the whole mart, and the thief seizes the opportunity to escape amidst the chaos. But the thief, running off, encounters a giant worm-like monster emerging from the ground. Recognizing it as a calamity, he panics, questioning its presence in a green zone and thinking of escaping. Just as he attempts to flee, the worm swallows him whole. The monster faces the civilians as an emergency announcement warns that a calamity has appeared, and all nearby civilians should evacuate. With the Spider Queen's appearance, the danger level escalates to red. Her minions scatter, attacking civilians. The Spider Queen approaches a child, ready to bite, but Lee Jian intervenes, punching it down. He tells the trembling kid to watch his surroundings and checks if he's alright. The kid runs off, and Lee Jian comments that he's relieved the kid is fine. Lee Jian, glancing around, notes there are more calamities in the area than people. Powering up his mana, he states that since it's been a while, he'll enjoy a warm-up. Yang Wei hears about a report that a calamity has broken out in a market in Bucheon. He questions which calamity it is, and it's revealed that it's the Spider Queen. Yang Wei is horrified, realizing they failed to subjugate it last time and only managed to seal it temporarily. Now, he curses, knowing it'll be hard for him to handle a red-level calamity alone. Since calamities began appearing, humanity divided them into 6 levels: blue, the gods' pure sanctuary; green, safe; yellow, caution; orange, danger, evacuation; red, ruled by calamities; and black, human extinction. If the Spider Queen has appeared, the market has already become a red zone. The subordinate asks what they should do about the market, and after hesitating, Yang Wei suggests they bury it, thinking it'll be a problem if word spreads about their failure to subjugate it. Reluctantly, he orders an announcement that all people there are dead and dispatches the disciples to bury the entire building. The scene shifts to inside the building as Sunghoon uses his frost skill to freeze all the minions, noting that these pests seem to underestimate the power of S rank, only to see the worms break through the ice, shocking him as he realizes it shattered the magic so easily. Lee Jian steps in, ordering him to move aside, and Sunghoon questions when he got there. Lee Jian confronts the worms, asking if it was trying to eat people because it had nothing else to do as he tosses cans at the flies and minions to destroy them. Lee Jian then dashes forward, slicing the worm in 2, cursing the fools, baring their fangs. Effortlessly, he cuts down the minions, stating that they should know their place, making Sungjae and Jimin shocked at the sight. Lee Jian gets notified that he's handled the calamity and acquired new materials for production. Lee Jian questions the materials, and the system explains that he can now produce new skills and divine artifacts. Lee Jian wonders if his production skill has evolved and notes he'll have to test it later. He reflects that despite his 50% physical ability penalty, his movements weren't bad, meaning he could become stronger than he was before. Sung-hoon, baffled, thinks it's impossible. Even his S-rank magic barely affected the minions, yet Lee Jian took care of them easily. He wonders where someone like this came from, calling Lee Jian a layperson and suspecting him of having malicious intent toward their disciples. Lee Jian realizes he's referring to the two beaten disciples and punches Sung-hoon, telling him to shut up and questioning how he found out. Sung-hoon scoffs, wondering how he couldn't know with Lee Jian wearing the clothes and badges he stole from their disciples. Those badges are strong divine artifacts given only to the Gemini disciples, and Sung-hoon assumes Lee Jian's unreasonable strength is because of that gift. Lee Jian, noticing the badges, crunches down on it, calling it trash and making Sung-hoon scream in pain. Lee Jian laughs, remarking that these so-called divine artifacts are purely decorative, adding that even after 20 years, the brats are as weak as ever. Suddenly, a monster's roar is heard, and Jimin fearfully identifies it as the Spider Queen. Lee Jian launches himself toward the creature, telling it to get lost already, slamming it into the ground, shocking everyone. Sung-hoon thinks it's insane as he charges toward the Spider Queen without divine artifacts. A telepathy announcement is made for all Gemini disciples in the market. Sung-jae and Sung-hoon hear the telepathic message and recognize the voice of Divine Commander Captain Choi Sung-hyuk. Choi urgently orders them to exit the building immediately, explaining that the Ares team will be arriving soon to demolish the structure. He adds that Yang Wei is coming personally and that there's no way to stop him, revealing that the Spider Queen was something Yang Wei couldn't subjugate, and they're hiding the truth to avoid a scandal. Choi instructs Sung-hoon, who has a teleport skill, to use it to get himself and Sung-jae out. Sung-hoon hesitates, asking if it's only the two of them as he sees other injured civilians and Lee Jian fighting the Spider Queen. He shivers as Choi questions if there's a problem. But Sung-hoon denies it, saying there's no problem at all. Sung-jae screams that even begging for help wouldn't be enough, questioning what Sung-hoon is saying. He angrily asks if Sung-hoon doesn't see the chaos they're in and accuses him of just trying to bury everyone alive. Sung-hoon, attempting to stay calm, states that he knows the situation is dire, but they still have to think carefully. If news breaks that the Spider Queen appeared in the middle of the city, what will people think? Sung-hoon insists that the censor board will definitely rebuke the divine order, which would weaken people's devotion and thus, the divine god's strength. He explains that for humanity to receive protection from the divine gods, their devotion must remain unshakable. Furious, Sung-jae retorts, asking if Sung-hoon is seriously suggesting they bury everyone alive just for that reason. Sung-hoon counters with determination, saying he still has the teleport device he rented, which can teleport 2 people at a time. He tells Sung-jae that, since this is an order, he will take Sung-jae out specifically. Sung-jae, however, is not convinced, questions what will happen to his friend, saying he can't leave him behind. He adds that there are still too many people who haven't been able to evacuate, and he won't abandon them. Sung-hoon, clearly frustrated, calls him an idiot, questioning why Sung-jae is pestering him in a situation like this. Sung-hoon insists he has no plans to be buried alive because of incompetent fools like Sung-jae. He adds that he also can't ignore the commands of the Divine Order's captain and that he will get rid of these burdens, so Sung-jae won't have to worry about them. Sung-jae, furious, curses him and powers up his aura. Sung-hoon, undeterred, questions if Sung-jae is really considering fighting him at a time like this, pointing out that they are on completely different levels. He urges Sung-jae to stop with the endless guilt and make the wise choice. But before the argument can escalate further, the Spider Queen suddenly crashes into him, knocking Sung-hoon back. Sung-jae, seeing the chaos unfold, calls out to Lee Jian, who states they need to get out immediately. However, Sung-jae insists they can't leave because the exit is blocked by the calamities, so they either need to use the teleport device or deal with all the enemies themselves. He points out that there are many injured people who need help and that the Ares group guards are blocking the outside. Lee Jian agrees that the situation is a real mess, but they don't have many choices. Meanwhile, Sung-hoon, enraged and frustrated, yells at Lee Jian, accusing him of trampling him in his own desperate attempt to escape. Lee Jian, unfazed, questions if Sung-hoon didn't abandon everyone else just to escape alone. Sung-hoon retorts, telling him to shut up, saying they should try to stay alive on their own since he's going to escape, even if it's just by himself. But as Sung-hoon tries to escape, the Spider Queen's thread catches him, attaching itself and pulling him back toward her mouth to gulp him down. Witnessing this terrifying sight, Lee Jian tells Sung-jae he'll handle the threat for now. He urges Sung-jae to go and gather the injured so they can leave as quickly as possible. Sung Jae and the others, baffled by Lee Jian's sudden resolve, reluctantly agree. The scene shifts outside, where Yang Wei is surveying the situation. He asks his team what the situation looks like and whether the area has been fully sealed. One of the casters responds that the seal isn't holding as expected, and a strange green light emerges from the barrier to break the barrier, signifying the arrival of the snake constellation. Yang Wei, recognizing this, is shocked and wonders what's going on. Meanwhile, civilians are fleeing from the building, calling for help and shouting that there are still people trapped inside, mentioning that someone defeated the Spider Queen. Yang Wei, surprised, realizes that someone must have defeated the Spider Queen, a feat even he hadn't been able to accomplish. Determined to understand what's happening, he decides to check the building himself. However, the guards stop him, warning that calamities might still be lurking inside. Yang Wei shrugs them off, saying he doesn't care, and jumps in, intent on seeing the situation for himself. As Yang Wei moves through the wreckage inside, he is speechless at the sight. He wonders who could have managed to kill the Spider Queen and how anyone could pull off such a feat. Observing the remnants of battle, he realizes that something significant must have happened here, questioning if this means the Spider Queen truly was hunted down. Yang Wei begins to sense that the situation is becoming much more complicated than he anticipated. The power of those involved is beyond what he expected. As he tries to process it all, Yang Wei feels a strange presence near the window, and he notices a familiar figure. Yang Wei wonders why Hugo, the Sagittarius saint, is here, realizing that Hugo might actually be the mastermind behind all of this. Just then, Yang Wei hears a voice echo in his mind, asking if his life would have been easier if he hadn't been present and questioning what's wrong with him. The voice taunts him, pressing on his insecurities and asking if he feels uncomfortable or out of place. Yang Wei, visibly shaken, doesn't know how to respond to the eerie voice haunting him. Li Jian then appears, stepping out of the shadows, questioning why his expression looks so grim. Seeing Li Jian, Yang Wei is scared to his pants to call him Li Jian. The scene shifts as doctors and fighters rush to attend to the injured civilians. Sung Jae and Jim are covered in blankets as they recover, while Sung Jae wonders if the person he saw was really Li Jian. Although the figure looked different, his movements were unmistakably similar. From behind, Hugo calls out to Sung Jae, questioning why he's here. Sung Jae, surprised, pouts out asking when Hugo returned to Korea. Jimin is quite surprised seeing that Hugo, the saint, has arrived. Hugo, slightly irritated, asks if that's the proper way to address him, considering he's Sungji's father. Jimin chuckles, and Sung Jae brushes off Hugo's remark. Hugo examines Sung Jae and notes that he doesn't appear to be injured. He should be fine after receiving some treatment. Hugo then asks why Sung Jae was in the area, saying he heard a calamity was killed there. Curiously, Hugo presses if he saw who did that. But Sung Jae merely shrugs, frustrating Hugo further. Hugo mutters to himself, wondering just whom Sung Jae takes after. Meanwhile, Jim adds that Jian Hyung should be fine, which surprises Hugo. He grabs Jimin by the shoulder and urgently asks if he just mentioned Jian Hyung. He demands to know where Jian Hyung is and how Jimin knows about him. Jimin speculates that he might be Jian's friend. Realizing the Saint Hugo's name is O Taek-soo, explaining that Jian Hyung is currently inside the building. Furthermore, he reveals that Jian Hyung is the one who defeated the Spider Queen and that he introduced himself as Li Jian. Hugo, visibly intrigued, tells Jimin to share more details. Suddenly, an explosion rocks the building, and Hugo grits his teeth, realizing something is wrong. Elsewhere, Yang Wei is locked in a fierce battle with Li Jian. Li Jian taunts Yang Wei, saying it's been 20 years since they last saw each other and accusing him of attacking out of nowhere. Yang Wei, still in shock, questions how Li Jian could possibly be alive, though he admits to himself that he looks strangely familiar. He notices that Li Jian lacks the scars he remembers, and although Li Jian's voice is somewhat similar, there's something off about it. Yang Wei curses, accusing Li Jian of impersonating Li Jian. He shouts that he got scared for no reason, but Li Jian, unfazed, asks why he would pretend to be someone else. Yang Wei's mana flares as he shouts, questioning how Li Jian dares to challenge him, claiming he's prepared for the consequences. Without missing a beat, Li Jian dashes forward, landing a heavy punch and questioning, what the hell was that? He calls Yang Wei weak and asks if Yang Wei truly believed he was lying. The impact sends Yang Wei crashing to the ground as Li Jian sneers, saying people like him won't listen until they're beaten senseless. Li Jian questions whether life improved for Yang Wei and his allies after they trapped him in the Demon Tower. He accuses Yang Wei and his comrades of stealing his divine artifacts and assets, adding that he even heard about Yang Wei feeding off his will. Yang Wei tries to reason with Li Jian, but Li Jian clenches his fists, saying he was already planning to kill every last one of them. He declares he'll start by teaching Yang Wei a lesson and will then move on to take over his household, reclaim his divine artifacts, and dismantle the entire Saint Order. The sheer intensity of Li Jian's words makes Yang Wei tremble. Li Jian promises to destroy everything, and Yang Wei, gritting his teeth, realizes the threat is no bluff. He recalls how he couldn't even track Li Jian's movements just now and begins to wonder if Li Jian really is the legendary Li Jian and if he somehow survived the tower. Yang Wei, struggling to stand, releases his mana, invoking the power of the divine god, the Jade Emperor, whose presence begins to manifest around him, who warns if he really is Li Jian, then he has to prove it to him. Li Jian notes that only a portion of the divine god's power has appeared, remaining unimpressed. Yang Wei flicks his fingers, and chains shoot out, aiming to restrain Li Jian. He mocks if he still looks weak. Yang Wei, smirking, retorts that he doesn't understand how Li Jian managed to come back from the tower with so much arrogance. Yang Wei tightens his chains, using the royal skill of the divine god's weapon, and launches a flurry of attacks toward Li Jian. Li Jian, tauntingly, calls Yang Wei's display impressive just to provoke him further. Infuriated, Yang Wei summons countless swords, intending to bury Li Jian in a mountain of blades. After a moment of silence, Yang Wei questions if he really died. Approaching him, he expressed his own surprise at Li Jian's resilience. Yang Wei admits he's astonished to see Li Jian return from the Demon Tower but dismisses Li Jian as foolish for challenging him head-on. Yang Wei gloats, saying he's grown stronger over the past 20 years, leveling up through experience points and discipline, and scoffs at the idea that Li Jian thought he'd waste those years. Just as Yang Wei starts to feel victorious, a green glow emerges from the mountain of swords. He realizes, horrified, that Li Jian is still alive. Li Jian charges through the pile of swords, breaking them effortlessly as he goes, and strikes Yang Wei with an intense punch. Yang Wei, lying battered on the ground, stares up in disbelief, asking how Li Jian survived the attack. Shaken, he finally asks the question that's been haunting him, is he really Li Jian? Li Jian, smiling down at him, responds with satisfaction, asking if he finally recognizes him. He declares he is back for real. Li Jian throws out the swords embedded in his body and questions why even his weapons now smell like garbage. Yang Wei lying in disbelief, muttering that such restoration is impossible, even for Ares healers. Just then, Li Jian receives a notification that he's had a near-death experience, meeting the conditions to unlock the skill of the 13th sense, which has now been activated. Li Jian smirks and thanks Yang Wei, saying he's grown stronger thanks to him. He then crunches his fists and taunts Yang Wei, suggesting he try something else. Meanwhile, Li Jian receives another notification. The divine god of Ares is astonished by Li Jian's survival. Ares trembles, exclaiming that this is impossible, but with Li Jian's newfound power, the divine god of Ares fades away in a flurry of curses. As Ares vanishes, Yang Wei shouts, bewildered about why a divine god would disappear. Li Jian shrugs, commenting that Ares probably realized it was pointless to fight him. Visibly enraged, Li Jian clenches his fist, saying he's feeling merciful today and will only make Yang Wei feel a fraction of the pain he went through. With a merciful smile, he steps forward, and Yang Wei's screams of agony fill the air. The scene shifts as the guards nearby spot the dead Calamities. They look around, shocked by the corpses of Calamities strewn everywhere. Sensing the powerful energy, Hugo notes that it's definitely Yang Wei's energy and concludes that Li Jian must have caused this chaos. The guards sense something is wrong, noting that while they can feel Yang Wei's energy, it's too faint to indicate he's still alive. They question what could have happened. Hugo then calls for his bow, asking everyone to step back, and fires an arrow into the ground to crunch the floor. As he descends down, he calls Li Jian a scoundrel, wondering just what kind of mess he'll create next. The scene then shifts to Li Jian as he approaches a palace, remarking that the divine artifact Yang Wei stole from him is somewhere inside. Entering the building, Li Jian scowls, noting that Yang Wei flaunts his wealth with a distasteful amount of luxury. Li Jian's nose catches the scent of his divine artifact, but he's puzzled by the number of fake artifacts and gaudy clothes scattered around, all seemingly taken from his own house. Shaking his head, muttering that they were used by him at some point. Finally, Li Jian locates his true artifact, a familiar toothpick, calling it his precious baby. Suddenly, alarms blare as guards rush in, shouting about a thief on the premises. Li Jian, now surrounded by countless guards, is ordered to surrender and put down the item peacefully. With a smirk, Li Jian flares up his mana, stating that he doesn't plan on surrendering. Flipping his toothpick between his fingers, he laughs and greets the guards, taunting them. With the flick of the toothpick, all the guards are scattered all around. The system notifies Li Jian that he's discovered a divine artifact, the Omnificent Mud Ball, a production-oriented divine artifact with shape-shifting abilities. It states that he's now met the conditions to unlock the skill, Creation Workshop. A notification appears, confirming that a 1.5-meter workshop has been created specifically for him, and that with his newly unlocked engraving skill, the unique traits of the omnificent mud ball can be granted to his creations. Li Jian then muses about heading out but pauses as he feels a powerful energy radiating from another divine artifact of Ares nearby from a room. He sighs, thinking it would be disappointing to leave empty-handed now. He approaches the door, smiling and murmuring, "Now the fun begins." The scene shifts to Hugo, who arrives at the palace, wondering if he's too late. He shouts out for Li Jian, but the scene quickly shifts to Li Jian, who is already outside, hauling all the artifacts he managed to snatch. He thinks to himself that he's starting to feel hungry. Just then, Hugo spots him and calls out, running toward him. Li Jian notices it's Hugo and smirks, amused. He muses that he's still his friend after all, but instead of approaching him, Hugo runs straight to an injured person, misunderstanding him as Li Jian, as he scolds him for not coming to him immediately and asking why he is lying around injured right after his arrival. He then fusses over the injured person, checking that their leg is okay and ensuring they're in good health. Li Jian watches, visibly annoyed. He kicks Hugo, snapping his mind off, questioning if he can remember his friend's face. He adds that if he wants to get beaten for mistaking him for someone else. Hugo finally notices Li Jian's divine artifact, the slime, and his eyes widen. He stutters, asking if it could really be him. Li Jian raises a fist, asking if he needs a punch to straighten out his memory, calling him a blockhead. At this, Hugo shivers to his knees, hugging Li Jian, tears in his eyes as he cries out that Li Jian is really alive. Hugo asks that it's truly him, overwhelmed with emotion. Li Jian, however, punches him away, grumbling about why Hugo would hug him out of nowhere. Hugo, undeterred, realizes it really is him, calling him Jian with a mix of awe and disbelief. Li Jian is then informed by the appearance of the divine god of sages, Apollo, who descends with a sudden, radiant presence. With Hugo stunned, Li Jian ponders why Apollo would appear here. The divine god Apollo ponders as he stares toward Li Jian. Li Jian is notified that the divine god of the Sagittarius is questioning the survival of Li Jian, and the divine god of the Sagittarius is requesting to check if it is really him. Hugo questions how he can do that, for which the divine god of Apollo states something will happen if he shoots him with a flaming arrow, aiming at Li Jian. Hugo tries to stop him as Li Jian curses in anger to question if that god is aiming at someone the moment he is popping up. Hugo tries to convince him that it's okay as long as he's fine. Li Jian questions that he needs to pay him back now, making Hugo confused. Li Jian recalls Hugo of his previous message, warning that he kill him and bids him good luck. Li Jian states that when he came out of the tower, his house was sold, his will was forged, and all his divine artifacts were missing, making Hugo shiver in fear. Li Jian raises his fist, asks to let him have a good time as he punches Hugo down. Hugo, with a bump on his head, smiles to comment that it's really him. Suddenly, the security guards of the palace come out, screaming that they have found him, the person who stole the divine artifacts. Li Jian remembers that he was being chased, making Hugo pray that what on earth did he steal. Li Jian comments to inform just a few things, which Hugo can't believe that he looted Yang Wei's vault. Li Jian affirms to question if he did well. Hugo grabs him, questioning him in anger on what he did. The security question is the team leader if they'll get him right away, to which the team leader responds, saying that he is not someone in their caliber and won't stand a chance. They've called someone who matches his strength. A certain tremor can be felt as the team leader states that it's here, the household god of Ares, the beast of riches, Pishu. It is notified to Li Jian that the household god of Ares, Pishu, has appeared. He is also warned that all the riches and divine artifacts may be taken. Hugo, quite worried, states that the household god of Ares is here too and asks Li Jian if they should just throw away the things that he stole from Yang Wei and run away. Li Jian tells Hugo to just stand still, as he's a man with a plan. He calls out for Lime for a sword as Lime lights up. As Li Jian pulls out a dagger. Li Jian thinks that using it against a household god in this state would be tough, but he calls for the dagger to show him its hidden form. The dagger overflows with aura. Seeing the huge aura whirl up, Hugo questions this huge amount of power. The dagger transforms into a huge longsword for which Li Jian states that finally, it's somehow usable. It is notified that the divine artifact has evolved through the power of Ophiuchus, and due to the trait of Ophiuchus, the snake catcher, the sword has been given a critical hit attribute. The sword has gotten sharper, the attack power has increased, and the path of death is now visible. Li Jian states that he has acquired a new skill as he activates his 13th sense to clearly see the weak spots of the beast. He dashes toward Pishu, stating that he has to wreak havoc now. Hugo realizes that it was always his method to strike first, and he always managed to defeat all the challenges that were thrown at him, even if it appeared reckless. He encourages Li Jian to go get him, but Pishu crunches Li Jian down into the ground, making Hugo petrified on the spot. However, Li Jian, under the fong of Pishu, questions the thing he is screaming about. He curses the damn big pig, stating that the stench of his foot almost killed him. Pushing out his fong, Li Jian declares that it's his turn now. He slices his foot down, and Pishu screams in pain. Li Jian is notified that the Beast of Riches is using its abilities, and Pishu is taking all the riches in its surroundings. Li Jian says that he wouldn't have been beaten up if he had stayed still. Li Jian throws his sword, using the trait of Ophiuchus, which is activated. Whirling his aura up, Li Jian asks if he can allow him to hit him lightly just once as he activates the trait of Snake Catcher and slashes to launch an attack upon Pishu. The shock waves of the attack penetrate through Pishu, destroying the whole palace and the whole forest through it. Hugo is baffled by seeing this power, stating that it is the same as how Li Jian was in his prime. Li Jian is notified that he has taken down a household god, and his zodiac experience points have risen. He is asked whether he will bring Pishu, the Beast of Riches, into his household. Li Jian questions if he has the ability to control household gods, and that is only for the 12 divine gods. Li Jian touches Pishu to engulf and transform it into an evolved version. Li Jian is notified that the Beast of Riches has become a household member of Ophiuchus, and the number of current household members is 1. Hugo is stunned as it's the royal divine artifact of Ares, the Golden Fleece, capable of storing anything and proliferating items at a price. Pishu, the Beast of Riches, has decreased in size to be hugged by its master. Li Jian exclaims in excitement that since he now has the Beast of Riches, he can use it to store all his treasures. Li Jian plays around with it while Hugo comments that he turned a household god belonging to a divine god into his own, questioning what could have happened before his return to have him gain such an ability. Li Jian is notified that he can give a name to Pishu, who has become his household god. Hearing this, Li Jian excitedly names it Piggy Bank. The scene shifts to Hugo's house, where Li Jian calls Hugo a traitor. Hugo, furious, retorts, asking if Li Jian even understands how worried he was. Li Jian argues back, accusing Hugo of getting married, setting up a family, and living a comfortable life while he was trapped in the tower. He blurts out how he struggled to survive, trapped and trying to escape, while Hugo, who dared to call himself a friend, lived a happy life. Li Jian wonders aloud if that's how a friend is supposed to behave. Adds that Hugo couldn't even recognize him after 20 years, though he admits he looks much cleaner now. However, he questions if that's how a saint should act. Hugo, barely holding back his anger, listens as Li Jian declares that he guesses he won't be able to relax in Hugo's house. Hugo sighs and states it doesn't matter, he can stay for now, as he lives alone anyway. Li Jian, realizing he may have crossed a line, tries to console him, admitting he might have said something unnecessary. Attempting to lighten the mood, as Li Jian teases Hugo about being divorced. Hugo immediately screams in denial, insisting he isn't divorced, though he fumbles. Brushes off the topic, asking instead about Li Jian and what happened in the tower. Hugo hesitates, debating whether he should tell Li Jian everything, particularly about Sung Jae and Yuha, who are fanatics of him. Hugo explains that during that time, he was busy fighting calamities outside and had no idea what happened in the tower. He questions why the others were carrying the Crimson Eye's head instead of Li Jian. Li Jian sighs and begins explaining, saying there's a sad story behind it. He reveals that he was betrayed, stabbed in the back, and thrown into a trap in a place swarming with calamities. To make things worse, the dead Crimson Eye had come back to life. Hugo is shocked, but Li Jian adds that the Crimson Eye they saw wasn't its real body. The real Crimson Eye was deep inside the tower, and he had to fight and defeat it. However, he insists that the real problem wasn't the Crimson Eye but the administrator of the tower, a figure capable of reviving dead calamities. Li Jian describes how he barely managed to fight his way out, enduring brutal torture from the sadistic administrator. In the end, he killed the administrator but collapsed after exhausting all his strength. He even believed he had died there. When he woke up, the hellish monsters were gone, and somehow, he had gained his current abilities. One thing was clear to him: the person who betrayed him knew the structure of the demon's tower well enough to trap him in a calamity-filled cave deliberately. Li Jian vows revenge, promising to punish those who stole his assets and tarnished his name. He reserves special treatment for the backstabber and starts planning his next moves. He announces he will use his creation workshop skill to craft divine artifacts to help him in his quest. The system prompts him to choose materials, offering options like the corrupted essence of the Spider Queen, a fragment of Calamity, and other rare items. Additionally, it detects divine artifacts of Ares that can be used. Excited, Li Jian decides to throw everything into the mix. The creation of the divine artifact begins, and an artifact with an ego emerges, a piece called Imitation Horse. The ego explains that if someone's name is written on it, the artifact allows the owner to absorb the magic power of anyone they touch. Li Jian is thrilled, noting that a divine artifact with an ego can grow stronger over time. Hugo claps on to cheer Li Jian, but he sarcastically remarks that while it's high-grade equipment, it doesn't look very impressive. Furious, Li Jian yells at Hugo, questioning if he realizes how many materials he used for this creation. He adds that he was considering making equipment for Hugo, but now he's changed his mind. Panicking, Hugo quickly backpedals, showering Li Jian with compliments and calling him a genius for creating a divine artifact. Li Jian cools down, stating that he'll decide based on how well Hugo performs from now on. He shifts the topic to their next steps, suggesting they start by dealing with the saints who betrayed him. Hugo is shocked as he questions why Li Jian would bring out such a top-tier artifact when he can't even use it. Li Jian replies that he heard Hugo is a saint with no money, so he brought it to fund him. Hugo explodes, angrily denying that he's poor. Li Jian explains that higher-grade divine artifacts require more resources to create, and they can use the golden fleece to multiply their materials. Hugo protests, pointing out that no one present can activate it. Li Jian, irritated, questions if Hugo can't use it. Hugo furiously declares that he's not the Aries saint but the Sagittarius saint. As Li Jian gets to realize this, he thinks that they will have to find another method. Hugo apologizes, but before they can strategize, Li Jian casually mentions that he already sent a war declaration to the broadcasting station. Hugo flinches, coldly demanding to know what Li Jian sent and to which place. Li Jian shrugs, saying they'll figure something out. Hugo panics, screaming and calling Li Jian a lunatic. The scene abruptly shifts to the Blue House in Korea, where an awakened calls the Gemini cadre retards for failing to kill a single spider and humiliating themselves instead. Captain Oliver of the Leo Divine Corps scoffs, mocking their failure. When someone mentions that the Spider Queen was slain by an unknown figure, Oliver sarcastically wonders if the dead Li Jian has come back to life. But Choi of the Gemini cadre interrupts to state that Oliver is too obsessed with Li Jian fantasies. Oliver asks what if it matters, as Li Jian could definitely kill the Spider Queen easily. He questions if he hadn't seen the famous Russian subjugation battle video. Choi annoyingly rebukes him, stating that Li Jian had done that because he received the buffs of the other saints and his weapons were given to him by others as well. He adds that with that kind of support they would have done better. Oliver scoffs that he guesses they were not able to deal with the Spider Queen because they didn't have enough support. Choi, flaring up his aura, clarifies that the awakened from the Aries were the ones who killed the Spider Queen, thanks to the sacrifice of an S-rank disciple. Oliver as well manifests his aura, asking if Aries is that strong, stating that he would love to meet that person. He mocks Choi, stating that they will have to take a look for that person in the stomach of the Spider Queen. Seeing the tension between them, the Prime Minister clenches his teeth, questioning when the Blue House became a den of such thugs. Their argument is interrupted when a guard rushes in, urging the president to watch the news. It is reported that a mysterious package has been delivered to a broadcasting station, containing photos of someone resembling Wang in a short note reading, "He's back." Handwriting analysis confirms a 99% match to the deceased Li Jian. Back at Hugo's house, Hugo screams in agony, demanding to know what Li Jian was thinking. Li Jian casually replies that it was a war declaration and tells them to prepare for their downfall. Hugo calls him reckless, insisting that killing Wang is already a huge issue, and now he's made things worse. Li Jian clarifies that Wang isn't truly alive or dead, holding up a rabbit toy. Hugo stares in disbelief as the toy curses under its breath as it's Wang, trapped inside. Hugo is disgusted as he questions whether it could be Wang Ye. Yang Wei, trapped in the doll, screams to let him go and release him. Li Jian pulls his ear, stating that his abilities have improved quite a bit from the experience gained in this battle, making it possible to restrain Wang's soul. Hugo questions if something like this is even possible and wonders what in the world has happened. Lee Jian dismisses his question, saying it's not important, and asks him to look at something, handing him a knife. Lee Jian reveals that the knife was embedded in his back and is what led him into a trap. Hugo, quite nervous, notes that it's the blade that pushed Lee Jian to his death. From the engraving, it doesn't look like an ordinary blade. Hugo questions if he was stabbed, then it definitely wasn't Wang. Lee Jian states that he'll then kill Wang then. Lee Jian adds that he would be dropping by the Divine Artifact store for a bit. Hugo questions about his visit, for which Lee Jian explains that Wang mentioned seeing that engraving somewhere in the store. Lee Jian asks Hugo to lend him some clothes. Hugo responds that he can wear anything from the closet. As Lee Jian gets dressed, he calls Wang, slave number 2, and asks him to guard the house. Hugo asks if there's a slave number 1, to which Lee Jian bids farewell, calling Hugo, slave number 1, making him shout in anger.
Scene shifts to the museum, where the Aquarius officials report to the saint that the Aries saint is missing, and they can't sense the divine god's energy. The Aquarius saint, Sophie Marty, states that she wonders where he went. The officials speculate that he might have disappeared with all the wealth, to which Sophie remarks that if he made a deal with another saint behind her back, it could be quite troublesome. She questions whether that big piggy ran off. The subordinate questions if it's possible that Li Jian, who recently returned, might have kidnapped Wang. Sophie laughs, calling it a joke, but a maid apprehensively cries in despair as she is tortured by her. The subordinate apologizes for the unnecessary comment, but Sophie dismisses it, saying it's fine. She declares she'll head to the Divine Artifact store as planned, intending to sell off the divine artifacts to prepare funds for the drachma auction. However, an official interrupts, reporting to the saint that a major issue has occurred as other saints have also applied to participate in the drachma auction, shocking Sophie. The scene shifts to Lion's Gym, where people are surprised seeing the person. Stephen, the Leo saint, hears that Li Jian's divine artifact will appear in the drachma auction. Throwing his robe, he excitedly declares that it has finally appeared. Elsewhere, Li Jian and Sung Jae teleport to the Divine Artifact store complex. Li Jian remarks that teleportation is convenient, and Sung Jae notes it's usually expensive but free for Gemini affiliates. Li Jian thanks Sung Jae for the introduction to an SS rank appraiser, to which Sung Jae replies it's not much, recalling orders from Choi to escort Li Jian and provide him with any support needed. Li Jian questions Sung Jae if his boss is bothering him. He gives Sung Jae a dagger, instructing him to use it well against insects. The dagger is imbued with desire and a skill to summon 2 soldiers. Sung Jae questions whether the dagger wasn't rusted before, and Li Jian confirms he fixed it, warning that its effects are now slightly different. Sung Jae thanks him, and Li Jian asks if that's the place where the SS rank appraiser is. The scene shifts to the Divine Artifact store. People are amazed, noting the beauty of the Aquarius saint, Sophie Marty. She asks an official to leave some divine artifacts for the appraiser before the auction. The official apologizes, stating the appraiser is currently with another customer. Sophie smiles outwardly, saying it's fine, but internally she seethes, questioning who in the world dared to occupy the appraiser while she's present. She questions about the person who is inside. Inside, Li Jian notes that it's rare to see an SS rank running such a place and comments on the high prices. The appraiser asks Sung Jae who made a particular artifact, to which Li Jian affirms that he is the one who made it. The appraiser, Jean, the Virgo affiliate SS rank, quite taken aback, asks if he has some sort of connection with Li Jian. Sung Jae explains that he is a Li Jian pretender, to which Jean asks Sung Jae that they are having an important to talk so he have to wait a moment. Jean remarks that most people only know Li Jian for combat, but he's also a legendary producer. Jean praises the artifact, saying he's seen countless counterfeits, but this one is genuine and reflects Li Jian's craftsmanship. Li Jian, flattered yet confused, acknowledges the compliment, stating that he must know a lot about Li Jian. Jean, blushing and smiling creepily, admits he's Li Jian's disciple, who once received his favor. This leaves Li Jian baffled and troubled by Jin's overly emotional reaction.